There are places in this world where the past refuses to rest, where echoes of pain, suffering and fear still linger, places where the veil between our world and the other side wears thin, so thin that you can almost reach out and touch it. Tonight we uncover 4 terrifying true stories of haunted, abandoned places. Places where the spirits of the dead still walk among us. Stay close and don't look behind you. Our first stop takes us to Louisville, Kentucky, where Waverly Hills Sanatorium stands as one of the most haunted places in America. Built in 1910, this hospital was meant to treat tuberculosis patients, but with no cure at the time, thousands perished within its walls. Can you imagine the suffering, the desperation, the fear that these people felt as they took their last breaths in this place? Their energy, their pain, it doesn't just disappear, it becomes embedded in the very walls, the very foundation of this place. They called tuberculosis the White Plague back then, a fitting name, don't you think? It swept through communities like a silent killer, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. And Waverly Hills became ground zero for this epidemic. Patients, many of them young children, were ripped from their families, quarantined in this massive complex, clinging to life, clinging to hope. But hope was a fleeting thing at Waverly Hills. The doctors, desperate to find a cure, experimented on patients with unproven treatments. Some say these treatments were more torture than medicine, and the body count, it just kept rising. The staff tried to maintain order, tried to bring comfort to the dying, but the sheer volume of death was overwhelming. The air itself felt heavy, thick with despair. And then there's the infamous body chute, a tunnel, dark and damp, where they say the bodies of the deceased were discreetly removed from the building. Can you imagine the energy that must have collected in that tunnel? The anguish, the fear, the finality of death, all channeled into that one space. People have reported seeing shadow figures lurking in the hallways of Waverly Hills, full-bodied apparitions of former patients and staff. They hear disembodied voices, whispers, moans and screams echoing through the empty corridors. Some have even felt unseen hands touching them, pushing them, pulling them towards the darkness. One of the most well-known stories is that of Timmy, a young boy who roamed the halls with a red ball. They say he died there and his spirit never left. People claim to hear his laughter echoing through the empty rooms, see his ball rolling down the hallways. Are you brave enough to walk those halls, to feel the chill down your spine, to hear the whispers of the dead? This is just the beginning of our journey into the heart of darkness. Our next haunted location lies off the coast of Venice, Italy, Poveglia Island, a place so cursed that even fishermen refuse to go near it. Imagine, if you will, a small island shrouded in mist, cut off from the mainland by dark, choppy waters. This is Poveglia, a place with a history so dark, so disturbing, that it sends chills down the spines of even the most hardened skeptics. For centuries, Poveglia served as a dumping ground for the unwanted, the diseased, the forgotten souls that society cast aside. During the Black Death, thousands upon thousands of plague victims were shipped here to die. Can you imagine the horror? The stench of death, the cries of the sick and dying, the sheer terror that must have permeated every inch of this island. But the horrors didn't end there. Centuries later, Poveglia became home to a mental asylum. The patients who were brought here were subjected to horrific experiments, tortured, driven to the brink of madness. And the doctors, well, let's just say some of them were as crazy as their patients. One doctor in particular, a man consumed by his own twisted desires, is said to have performed gruesome experiments on the patients, trying to unlock the secrets of the human mind. But his experiments only led to more suffering, more death, more darkness, seeping into the very core of the island. Legend has it that he was driven mad by the spirits of those he tormented, driven to hurl himself from the island's bell tower. People who have dared to set foot on Poveglia report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen entities. They hear whispers in the wind, screams that seem to emanate from the very earth itself. Some have even claimed to see shadowy figures lurking in the crumbling buildings, remnants of the island's dark past. The Italian government has forbidden anyone from setting foot on the island, declaring it off-limits. They say it's for safety reasons, that the buildings are unstable, dangerous, but I think they know something we don't. Are you brave enough to face the darkness that awaits on Poveglia Island? This is just the beginning of our journey into the unknown. Built in 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia was one of the first prisons to enforce total isolation. Prisoners lived in solitary confinement, seeing no one, hearing nothing but their own thoughts, and soon many went completely mad. Imagine, if you will, the crushing weight of silence, the deafening roar of your own thoughts echoing in the darkness. This was the reality for the inmates of Eastern State Penitentiary, a place designed to break the human spirit. They called it the Pennsylvania system, this idea of isolating prisoners from all human contact, forcing them to confront their sins in solitude. But what they didn't realize was that they were creating a breeding ground for madness, a place where the darkest recesses of the human psyche could flourish unchecked. The silence, it wasn't golden here, it was a weapon, a tool used to torture and torment. Each cell was designed like a small, self-contained world, with its own exercise yard, its own toilet, its own skylight that offered a sliver of the outside world. But that sliver of light, it only served to highlight the darkness that permeated every other aspect of their existence. The isolation, it was absolute, relentless. It drove men mad, turned them into shadows of their former selves. And the shadows, well, they lingered long after the prison closed its doors. Eastern State Penitentiary is now a chilling museum, a testament to the flawed nature of the penal system. But it's also a hotbed of paranormal activity, a place where the residual energy of suffering and despair is palpable. Visitors and investigators alike have reported hearing disembodied voices whispering their names, footsteps echoing down empty corridors, cell doors slamming shut on their own. Some have even claimed to see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their vision, apparitions of former inmates driven mad by the silence. Are you brave enough to confront the darkness that lingers within these walls? This is just the beginning of our journey into the heart of darkness. Stay close, and whatever you do, don't listen to the voices in your head. Now we travel to Singapore, where the Old Changi Hospital remains one of the most feared locations in Asia. Originally built as a British military hospital in the 1930s, it was later taken over by the Japanese during World War II. And that's when the real horrors began. Imagine, if you will, the humid air thick with the stench of antiseptic and fear. The constant drone of cicadas, a chilling counterpoint to the screams that echoed through the corridors. This was Old Changi Hospital during the Japanese occupation, a place where hope went to die. The Japanese, they had no regard for human life, especially not the lives of their enemies. The hospital, it became a living hell, a place of unimaginable cruelty and suffering. Prisoners of war, both soldiers and civilians, were subjected to torture, medical experiments and unspeakable acts of brutality. The stories that came out of Changi, they would make your blood run cold. They say the spirits of those who died within those walls, they never left. They're trapped here, their anguish, their pain, their anger, it's woven into the very fabric of this building. People who have dared to venture inside, they tell stories of disembodied screams, of shadowy figures lurking in the hallways, of an overwhelming sense of dread that clings to you like a shroud. There's a particular wing, Block 75, that's said to be the most haunted. It was here that the Japanese conducted many of their horrific experiments. They say the energy there is so thick, so oppressive that you can barely breathe. Are you brave enough to walk those halls? This is just the beginning of our journey into the heart of darkness. These abandoned places are more than just crumbling ruins. They are filled with restless spirits, echoes of suffering, and mysteries that will never be solved. They are portals to the past, gateways to the other side, places where the veil between our world and the next is thin, almost transparent. Would you dare to visit any of them? To walk in the footsteps of those who suffered, who died, who never found peace? To stand in the shadows of these haunted locations is to invite the unknown into your heart, to open yourself up to the possibility that we are not alone. It is to acknowledge that there are forces at work in this world that we do not fully understand, forces that defy logic and reason. Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to like, share and subscribe. But remember, some places should remain forgotten.